First of all, I have to tell you the story about this little girl. This little girl had one of those teddy bears that can talk. You know, anybody here has kids? Okay, lots of people have kids. So I imagine you know these little teddy bears that can talk back to you and can talk and all of that. And somehow the battery got out of the teddy bear and she swallowed it. It's like a 2032 battery. Does that ring a bell? Like those round ones, but then a smaller one, 2035 or 45 or something like that they're called. So, well, she's okay, don't worry, she's fine. They got it out and no serious damage. But that's not always the case. Those batteries are really, really dangerous. And those batteries shouldn't be in toys or should not be easily taken out of toys by kids. Of those of you who raise their hands that they have kids, who would like to have some kind of assurance that the toys your kids play with are pretty safe? Right. Right, so that's why we have the EU safety branding. So this came into effect when I was a kid. I know Europe gets a lot of shit. Can I say shit?
No.
Excuse my French, I'm from Brussels. So Europe gets a lot of heat for all the regulations we make. And there's two sides of the story. You know, one side, you don't want your kids to be choking on a battery. So there's a positive side for sure. And in the other side, sometimes there's a lot of regulations that make doing business more complicated and more complex. The reason I bring this up is because CRA is built on top of the European safety regulation. So it's built on top of that legislation, and you actually need a safe product markings in your products from now on. So you would have to put that, including on software of things. So, hello, my name is Dag. I'm co-founder at Codific. I think a lot of you have already met either online or in person somewhere. I have a doctorate in business administration with a focus on behavioral psychology or organizational psychology. So I come from a management side into application security. Ooh. I'm also a professor at the Geneva Business School. I'm also a board member there. And fun fact, apart from contributing a little bit to the OWASP SAMM group sometimes, I'm also one of the members of the OWASP Barcelona group. If you stick around for another month, I have another member of the OWASP Barcelona group who's going to speak next month in the local chapter. He's standing right there. The local chapter was just revived. It had died a while ago, and I think half a year ago, some of the people revived it here. I think most of you already aware of CRAs. Anybody does not know what CRA is? Okay, so CRA is a Cyber Resilience Act. It's a new legislation that came into effect recently. And it's a European level legislation, kind of like GDPR. It's sometimes compared to GDPR, even though it's covering something completely different but in its scope. And we'll come back to that in a bit. The idea is to have a minimum level of security in products. Like you don't want kids choking on batteries. I don't know what the equivalent is to choking on a battery in cybersecurity world, but I'm pretty sure you guys know.
You had it like last month. You had no electricity.
Yes.
No.
Well, we're still not sure if it was cybersecurity here. Yes, we were in the blackout here, wondering that for quite a few hours. But apart from that, there's like a secondary objective, which is less well known. It's about product transparency. You have to communicate to your customers a lot of things about your product, kind of like the Nutri-Score, which exists in some European countries and some doesn't. Does anybody know what a Nutri-Score is? Yeah, so there's like the scoring on products that has to tell you like whether it's healthy or not. Well, the idea there is not that you're not allowed to sell unhealthy products, but you have to inform your customer that they are unhealthy. So in the same way, you will have to inform your customer of everything that's going on in your product, and they hope then that the market mechanism that customers and especially businesses will choose not to select those products that are not that great. When does it come into effect? Well, it's complicated. Actually, the law is already in effect right now, but there's a transition period because it's so demanding. There's a transition period of a few years, and then it comes into effect in stages. But the date to remember is 2027. The big bang is at the end of 2027, but some notification obligations are earlier in 2027. But it's 2027, so you have a year and a half to get up and running pretty much. And who has to comply? Who thinks they'll have to comply with CRA in this room? Okay, not too many people. Okay, 40%. Well, it says all products with a digital component, but what is a product with a digital component? Well, the way it's defined is any product that could conceivably be connected to the internet. So it does not need to always be connected to the internet, but it could be connected to the internet. So baby phones, smart fridges, my watch, all of those things will be covered under CRA, but also software, which is important. Software with the exception of SaaS. So SaaS doesn't count unless your customer asks you for on-prem SaaS. Because if you're delivering the SaaS on-prem for your customer, then you're handing over the software and then it becomes covered under CRA. So then you will have to comply with all the legislations. All right, there is some classification in the products. The vast majority of the products will be non-critical. And then there are two classes of criticality or importance in the products, class 1 and class 2. Now, I would have done it otherwise, but class 2 is the highest level and class 1 is the second highest level, and then the non-critical products are below that. Class 2 is anything related to network infrastructure, antiviruses, things like that, things that are pretty key. And then class 1, a level below that. There's some discussion about IoT, whether it will fall under there or not. Some will, some may not. It's not yet 100% clear. But it doesn't really matter too much, because all of them have to comply with the same principles. So it's not like class 2 has to do other things than class 1 and the non-critical, but there's two big differences. The first big difference is how you demonstrate compliance. And for the vast majority of non-critical products, you can self-attest. The way the CE labels works right now, you collect the right documentation, you attach it to your product, and you're good to go. So you self-attest. In the case of class 1 and class 2, there's different degrees of third parties that have to be involved. That is either a private third party or also some form of validation by a government organization. That's one thing. So the way you certify is different for the classes. And the other thing is that everything is risk-based. So in CRA, in the text, we look specifically at the legislation text, the original text. Everything is worded that you should do this at a risk appropriate, at a level appropriate to the risk. You should do this to a level appropriate to the risk. So you can set the bar anywhere you want, as long as you can argue that that's a good place for the bar, and then you jump over your own bar. That's kind of how it works. But you cannot say, you know, I have a class 2 critical product and I'm going to set the bar here. That's not going to fly. So if you're in a class 2, you're going to have to set the bar pretty high. All right, but what if you don't want to? What if you don't comply? What happens next? Well, first of all, your product may be deemed unsafe and you may not be able to sell it within the European Union. So you can be withdrawn from the market. Also, if your product comes from abroad, it doesn't need to be produced here, it needs to be sold here. Anything sold here has to comply with this legislation, so then the importer will have to withdraw it from the market. But then there's also fines. And how much fines we're going to get, we don't know yet. But we made an educated guess. So we made a little study comparing GDPR. I know GDPR is different than CRA, but looking at how fast they started issuing fines, how many fines were issued, we made a little speculation of what it could be. The blue line is GDPR fines, and then the red lines are high and low estimates of where CRA could end up. The maximum fine is a little bit lower than in GDPR. I think it's like 15 versus 20 million and 2 versus 3 or 3 versus 4, depending on the categories, % of global turnover. But complying with CRA is actually a lot harder than complying with GDPR. We expect companies to struggle much more with the implementation of CRA, especially if you don't have an application security program in place currently. There's a lot that needs to be done for a lot of companies, and it's not going to be as quick or easy fix as GDPR was. Not that GDPR always was a quick and easy fix, but and also the fines are issued by in most countries by different instances and triggered on different events. And that's the big key we don't know. What is going to trigger the fines? In GDPR, anybody in this room could complain and say, my bakery processed my data wrong, and I'm going to file a complaint, and that would be a case. That's not very likely in CRA, but part of CRA, you also have to report all the incidences into a central database, and quite likely that is going to trigger questions from their side. So as long as nothing happens, as long as nothing breaks, maybe you'll get away with not complying with CRA. But as soon as something happens, and you have to report anyway, under GDPR you also have to report, you might be in trouble. Now we still have time. That's the good thing, and we're going to work on that. Now, how much is it going to cost? I come from the business side, right? So how much is it going to cost to comply with this? How much do we need? Well, it depends on how we do it. I think potentially, and there's no lawyers in the room, I hope, potentially the worst way to comply with it is to give it to the lawyer. Say, make the paperwork, make it go away. Make sure that we have all the documentation in place. And what's going to happen there, same as happens with ISO 27000 and all these other compliance frameworks, if you just hand it over to GRC or you hand it over to a legal team, but you do not link it to the actual security processes, is it really going to improve the security in place? And you may end up with different realities according to the different piles of papers you have across the organization. There's a reality according to your ISO policies, and then there's another reality according to your CRA policies, and another one for RED, and so on. That would be the most expensive way to comply with it, even though at short term it might seem the quick and dirty trick. The better way to comply with it is to fundamentally improve your processes, put the right processes into place in order to comply with that. Now, for that, we would need something that categorizes all the processes we could put in place on a different maturity levels, maybe adapt for different sizes of organizations. Anybody got any idea what we could use here? BSIMM, there we go. Yeah. So that's why OWASP SAMM fits in really, really, really well, because it's a catalog of processes, and you can start from there, check which processes you have, which processes you don't have, and what are you missing in order to comply with CRA? What are the things that are going to be required that you cannot deliver right now because you do not have the fundamental processes in place to do that? But when we tell this to people, they're like, all right, so you create a target posture in SAMM, and then we implement that, and then we're compliant, right? No. There's a lot of things that are not covered in OWASP SAMM. SAMM is about application security, whereas CRA is about product safety. And there's a lot of obligations around documentations, reporting, and all these things that are not covered in here. And even if you have all the processes in place, it's like you have a car that complies with regulations, but that doesn't mean you're going to drive with it according to regulations. You can still break the law while you're driving it. Meaning you have the processes in place does not mean that you collected the right reports, that you acted upon the vulnerabilities, that you didn't deliver software with known exploitable vulnerabilities, for example, which is illegal now. All right, so what do we need now? We need a mapping. We need a mapping from OWASP SAMM to CRA to see or from CRA to OWASP SAMM to see what exactly we need here. What is the minimum posture that we need? So we had 4 people make independent mappings, going through CRA, checking what is needed, and then each of us did that independently. Aram was there. I'm there. Maxime, who couldn't make it today, and Daniel, who I don't see either, I think. No. And then we came together, we talked through the differences, we debated, and we came to a final conclusion. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is it useless? Also not. Somewhere in between. So
I don't think Maxim and Daniel have the are agreeing with the final conclusion.
shh.
This is on record. I mean, there is still something going on.
So there's still some discussion. So
Yeah,
it's not maybe not final, but I think, well, we're not going to go into the details of that right now.
Bring the Godfather.
We'll make them an offer they cannot refuse. So well, one of the discussions we have with Maxim is that he wants to make the perfect posture or the recommended posture, whereas from a legislation perspective, we want to make a minimal required posture. So there will be probably a recommended posture coming later, but this is the minimum required that, I mean, if you don't jump over this bar, then there's no chance. There's no chance because there are fundamental processes missing. And this is the posture that you need in order to comply with CRA. The average score is 1.53, which is not that low, and it's very high in operations, in design, and in verification. Verification also because most companies are not very high in verification. Operations because you need really good incident management. You need a lot of, you're not allowed to ship products with known vulnerabilities. And you need to follow up on products for at least 5 years after you sell them. So it's not good enough that you ship and it's gone. You have a lasting obligation for at least 5 years, for which you also need to push updates. You need to have a way for customers to create updates. So those are operational processes you're going to need to have in place. There are security by design principles included the specific demands for schematic assessment of potential threats, which falls under design. And then verifications and implementations, there are some checks you need to do upon deployment, like you'll have to have an SEA tool, you'll have to have an SBOM for your products. There's still some debate as to how many levels your SBOM is going to need to have, but you're going to have a SBOM at least. Now, the interesting question here now is, how far away from this are we? Now, you can do this for yourself. You probably have your OWASP SAMM assessments, then you look at the gaps, and you see where are my big gaps. Okay, let's see if we can work on that. But we looked at the industry benchmarks from the OWASP benchmark data. So we compared that to the CRA target posture. Don't worry, you don't have to read the small print. I just give you the big picture first with color-coded here. So a lot of things the industry is doing pretty good on that level. But some things, and I'm going to zoom into them, there are serious gaps. And that's on the next slide. So application risk profile, according to OWASP SAMM maturity model, we need level 3 there. We need level 3 because everything has to be based on the risk of the application. Now, you can't argue something based on the risk of the application if you don't have a risk profile of the application. So you need to have that. You need to update that. You need to have proper processes in place around that. And then there are kind of two clusters here. One is about vulnerability management. So you're not allowed to deliver any kind of, you're not allowed to deliver products or software that have known exploitable vulnerabilities. And if vulnerabilities come out, you have to patch them. So you need proper vulnerability management systems in place. That's why you have patch and update, defect tracking, and legacy management. That all relates to that cluster of obligations, let's say. And then you have the architectural aspects. That's threat modeling and architecture mitigation. These are the more architectural design requirements. That is the third cluster where the industry is quite far behind on where we should be. But fortunately, you will all walk out here and solve all of that. So thank you very much for that. So the threat assessment questions, well, I think you guys know these questions. I'm going to skip that for the sake of time. All right, so is reaching the CRA ready SAMM posture. Is it enough? That's what I alluded to initially. There are some things missing. There's something. What if you're selling this internally? You're going to get this question, right? You're going to get the question like, okay, so if we do this posture, are we good? Sorry, no, you're still not good. But it will be relatively easy to cover the rest, and the rest is mostly around documentation and communication. So we have a scholar at the University of Tilburg. She couldn't be here today, but her name is Lara Brito. She's been on the OWASP SAMM community calls a few times, and she's doing some research about this, and she's basically going to take the SAMM minimal posture and then provide us with, I know a checklist is a dirty word, but a kind of checklist of what else you need to keep an eye on. And then you can use those two things together. You can say, okay, these are process-wise the things we need to do. If we do that, also make sure, and here are the things we need to make sure. There's 3 kind of communication things. This is a slide from Lara, by the way. There's product-related obligations, so the declaration of conformity, the CE label. So you have to have a CE marking on your product. I'm not really sure how you do that if you're passing your product over the air, but yeah, it's going to be in the documentation somewhere. So there's the product documentation that goes with your product to the customer. There is the official notification obligations around vulnerabilities and exploitable vulnerabilities that you need to notify of. And there is information to customers that you have to give along the process as well, like updates, like any exploitable vulnerabilities and things like that. You will have to inform your customers. And that's it. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much for listening. And oh, no, wait, there's one more thing. Here's DORA. And this is going to create a world of confusion because Matteo was talking about one DORA. Here's another DORA, and now there's 3 DORAs in the room. Is anybody concerned about DORA? A little bit here and there. So I was hoping to have the target posture ready for you guys today for DORA, or at least a draft of it, but it's not quite there yet, so I'm not going to present it yet, but it's going to come out soon. So pretty soon you'll have exactly the same thing for DORA to see what kind of processes you would need to have in place to implement DORA. And that's the real end of my presentation. Thank you.